Hey, welcome back. Today we are looking at 2 Samuel 22 to 23 as well as Psalm 57. So like I said yesterday, we are now in the epilogue of 2 Samuel, so it does feel like we're bouncing around a little bit because the author is just kind of including final closing thoughts. So you'll feel that in the reading, but we are definitely closing in on the end of this book of 2 Samuel.
Something that I noticed right away about 2 Samuel, these couple of chapters, was that it talked about David's final words. It says, now these are the last words of David. That's how 23 opens. So to me, it was just kind of like, whoa, wait, what? We're already transitioning out. And I know the way that we've been reading, we've definitely kind of like ping-ponged back and forth between several books and psalms of what David is experiencing, or psalms about David. So it was just kind of like, I guess, I don't know the right word, like maybe like a little startling, like,
Yeah.
wait, what?
It kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah. So as we talked about that a little bit, this isn't the last time that we will hear from David or about David, but we are kind of beginning to close that chapter as we're looking ahead to new leadership.
Definitely within the next couple of days, we'll be done talking about David for sure.
It's so weird.
So we're going to hear about David in Kings a little bit. We're going to hear about David a little bit more in Chronicles. So we're not done. And it is kind of an odd place in the book to put the final words of David. You would assume they would put those at the very end. Mm-hmm. They're not at the very end. So this is part of that epilogue. Like I said, it is bouncing around a little bit. And it's not the last that we'll hear of David, but this is like the last closing definitive statement of David.
It's kind of weird as we are reading through the Bible and we stick with certain characters for so long. It's kind of like when you watch like a show or like a series or a movie or something like that, and like characters that you feel so connected to. Now these are real life people that we're reading about, but how you kind of feel like, oh, wait, what? We're done with that now? Like, they're never coming back again? And, like, it's so strange. I felt the same way about Moses. I felt the same way about Aaron. I felt the same way about, what's his name? Oh, my word. Help me.
Joshua.
Joseph.
Joseph.
Yeah, like, all those characters. Just, like, weird. How are we already done? But here we are.
So the focus of David's last words are going to be essentially, it's short, seven verses. And there are some interesting things in it. One, he is declaring that he is speaking on behalf of God. So this is kind of a rare instance of David clearly operating as a prophet, speaking as an oracle of God. And he's highlighting essentially the covenant that God has made with him and promising that he would be the beginning of basically like a forever kingdom. We've talked about that many times. And he's highlighting that, and then also highlighting that those that work against the Lord are wasting their time, and ultimately those who work against the Lord are utterly destroyed in the end. So it's just highlighting the promise that God has made him and highlighting the fact that his kingdom will be around forever. We continue to believe that is true because we believe Jesus is ruling and reigning of King of Kings, and that's David's final words.
Yeah, what good advice and like, if you are passing the torch to someone else, I would appreciate this advice because it's pretty straightforward. When he talks about what he has heard from the Lord, it's basically like, verse 4 says, he dawns on them, like this is speaking of someone who rules justly. He dawns on them like a morning light, the sun shining forth on the cloudless morning. Or the rain that falls down and makes the grass sprout. But then it says in verse 6, but worthless are men who are like thorns that are thrown away, for they cannot be taken with the hand. So basically, like, it's really interesting how they compare, like, those who serve the Lord as, like, I'm assuming in this case, it's like leadership. Like, if you're going to be leading the people of God, you better be prepared to keep God the center and not to fall away, because worthless are the men who don't care about what God says.
That will become a very central talking point as we move into Kings. because those that chose to honor the Lord, they are some of the names that you recognize a little bit more over those that did not. Mm-hmm. And those that did honor the Lord ultimately ruled and reigned justly. They were merciful, they were righteous, and those that did not were just horrible. Mm-hmm. And Israel was successful under righteous kings, and Israel was incredibly unsuccessful under wicked kings. And so it is fitting that David is stressing, hey, serve the Lord, and it'll go well for you.
Mm-hmm. And I think he's speaking from his own experience, too. It's not just this, lofty, haughty kind of, well, I did great. He also had his moments of pretty terrible times.
Also, side note, there is a hilarious real-world application of this. This is not true just for ancient kings. Serve the Lord, and it will generally go well for you, because serving the Lord mm-hmm. tends to work out to be wise choices and good discernment. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it was applicable to kings then. It's applicable to us today. One other thing that is kind of interesting to note is that Psalm 18 is essentially exactly the same as 2 Samuel 22. So 2 Samuel 22 is David's song of deliverance. It's basically written when, Saul was coming after him with his army, and it was written when he had victory over Saul. And so it is almost exactly the same as Psalm 18. And there is some thoughts that one is just copied right out of the other. There's another thought that one was meant to be the actual song that was sung, and the other was the
instructions.
Yeah, kind of the instructions that came out of that. So almost like it was a tool to understand the song, or the song came out of the actual writings. But they are practically identical. So that's just, interesting. We have covered Psalm 18 before, so I don't think we're going to spend a lot of time on that. Also in 2 Samuel 23, you get David's last words in verses 1 to 7, and then you have kind of this recounting of David's mighty men from verse 8 to 39. We've heard these lists before. We've heard about these guys before. We've heard about the incredible things they've done. One guy fought off 800 guys by himself. One guy fought off 300 guys by himself. One guy killed a lion in a pit when it was snowy outside. So it's just recounting a lot of fantastical things that David's commanders were able to do. You will hear many names that are very familiar at this point. We hear about Joab. We hear about Uriah the Hittite, who was Bathsheba's husband that was killed by David. And so it's kind of a rerun. We've heard about these guys before, but it is also making sure that they are honored above other men, because David's mighty men were a big part of his story and a big part of his kingdom. So after we finished up 2 Samuel 23, we also moved into Psalm 57.
And Psalm 57 is interesting because this is actually kind of a callback psalm to when David was fleeing from Saul when he was hiding out in the cave. So this psalm is interesting because it's recounting a part of David's life. But overall, this psalm from our footnotes describes it as being a hymn that can be sung with confidence amid serious dangers, because we can look beyond those dangers around us and seek God's honor instead. So just I guess as we're looking at the story of David and those last words in chapters 22 and 23 of 2 Samuel, this just reflects back to one of those periods where of David's life where he had to fully rely on God when he was just hiding out for his life from Saul.
So that closes out our readings today. I think probably the easiest your part is from David's last words, which again, spoiler alert, are not actually David's last words as far as we will read them. But he's basically saying, if you want to be a good and righteous king, remember that God has been made a promise and a covenant with his people. And remember that when you serve him, you will honor him. And when you work against him, he'll work against you. Mm-hmm. So I think that remains true today. We are under God's new covenant. We have a relationship with God through the blood of Jesus, which Jesus has sealed that covenant. That promise stands forever. And because that promise stands forever, we can worship God and follow God. And when we do that, life will generally go well for us. I'm not saying you won't encounter difficult times. Of course you will. But it's ultimately best to live a life that honors God and worships him over a life that is against God. So David's last words remain valuable to us today. So we'll be back again tomorrow. I think we're diving back into some Psalms. So we'll see you then. Thanks so much for listening to our take today.
Thanks so much for listening to God's Plan, Your Part. If anything stuck out to you, if you have any questions, or if you'd like to receive a Bible, you can email us at godsplанyourpart@gmail.com. Also, if you're enjoying the podcast, please consider supporting us through the link in our description. We love that you're on this journey with us, and we hope you have a great day. See you tomorrow.